Good morning, Gene.
Good morning, still morning, James. Good to see you.
Always great to see you. I have another perplexing question for you. So,
Good.
can you please provide some insight on the cost of an agile transformation and any structural guidance on how to approach one?
Wow. So you're bringing up it's a pretty interesting one because costs, I would love to say, oh, this is free. But as we know, in almost nothing in this world is free. One way or the other, we would have to pay for it. There's really no such thing as free lunch. However, we need to understand, so the costs, economics of this is not a trivial topic. So let me give you some some of my own perception, some of the insight. Um, First of all, it does cost money. It will require some funding and budgeting to make any sort of improvements. Improving organizational agility, aka adaptiveness, is not free. It would cost time and effort. The question is how much. Also, I want to be very, very clear. Whoever listens to us, I don't want them to think that, oh, we're talking about agile, we're talking about adaptive, and when at the same time we're talking about costs, because sometimes people, lose the plot and they think, well, agile should be about cost effectiveness and making things cheaper. So every time we say more agile, more adaptive, we should be saving money. That's really not the primary goal. Adaptiveness, and it's not the same as being cheap, or agility is not the same thing as being cheap, or speed of delivery and adaptiveness of delivery are not the same thing. But going back to the topic of cost, so it does cost money, and I actually look very carefully these days at economics of agile transformations. And by the way, I don't like the term transformation because it sounds like we're transforming the world with a flip of a button or with a flip of a switch. No, of course not. So if I was an organization, if I wanted to do something that would have longer term economic impact, I would be taking very carefully, looking very carefully into what I'm doing today, how much time and money I'm spending today, and what's the result of it? What's the anticipated benefit of what I'm doing today? In my experience today, majority of organizations are very irresponsible about the way they manage their own funds, their budgets, as they go through these so-called agile transformations. And maybe because many organizations today make too much money to care. They're too much money, way more than we can imagine. So when we have these traditional, heavy, big bang, everything under the sun, everything that moves, agile transformations, we call them oftentimes broad and shallow because very little influence, very little impact, peppering with superficial changes. There was really no top-down support in action, just in spirit, lots of lip service. Mostly we're trying to change mechanics and dynamics at the bottom, at individual team level, with senior executives mostly doing just, yes, we support you in spirit, has $25 or $35 million, go figure it out. Next thing we know, either an organization brings a huge consultancy that just takes all of their money and leaves them in a worse situation they found them, or they spend these $25, $35 million on building their internal agile transformation power tower by relabeling, renaming old names into new names, now with the word agile and elite and enterprise. And of course, they just, almost take an organization nowhere closer to a better state, or very little, very little positive outcome of the effort they make, but at an extremely high cost. Highly unpredictable investments, and thousands of people involved.
And not
And
and
on
not
paper, it
just
probably
the
looks good.
and not just the cost of the consulting dollar, but the disruption itself.
It's a disruption that's very risky. Also, this is crazy to think that we can take 25 or 30,000 people through a transformation by putting them on some agile tool and spend who knows how many dollars and not put so many people in confusion and create risks, because there's only one time you can make a first impression. We screwed up once, and for the next 5, 7, 10 years, the organization will be very skeptic about this thing called Agile. Just a few words about doing this slightly differently is by going deep and narrow, by looking at the parallel organizational structure, and the concept itself is not that easy to understand unless people learn organizational design and system dynamics, such as what we teach in large-scale Scrum, for example. And we go very deep and narrow, top, bottom, and bottom up. We use volunteers. We really limit our effort, but we really, really go systemically by improving various organizational domains, such as HR norms and policies, budget and finance, HR norms, vendor management, site strategies, obviously business and operations, and of course R&D, research and development. So not cheap and not free for sure, but is much cheaper and much and less riskier, because you're not involving 20, 30,000 people at once by selling a false expectation. Hey, we have transformed through phase 1 and now phase 2, and by the time we get to phase 3, people that were promoting phase 1, they're already gone. Obviously, they moved on to something else, they got promoted. So economics are important, and when we do these big bangs with massive rollouts of systems of record, of Teams registries, Agile Teams registries, almost every company I talk to, they have a huge team registry for all Agile teams. Large, tooling implementations. It's a sign, it's a smell of it's going to be costly and risky. And when dust settles, you will see that you'll probably spend many, many, many $1 million with very little impact.
And because there is no deep structural change, it's just smoke and mirrors. It's an illusion of change rather than real change.
Superficial peppering, dusting.
Which may be good for the individual careers of certain people that are looking to put this on their resume that I did this thing.
Very true, very true.
And that seems to be what drives some of the dynamics as much as anything.
Unfortunately true.
Now, I think it is fair to say that within that deep and narrow area that you're focused in, you have to compare the cost of doing something to make it better with the ongoing cost of poor quality software that gives troubles in production, with continuing to build something that isn't actually what the customer wants, to not being sufficiently innovative. And much of these transformations are, a really well done LeSS transformation. The executive management is actively involved and is taking action at the point of the work, down at Gemba. And from an external consulting perspective, you don't need an army of Agile coaches. You need a few people who are really solid, and they may cost you a lot more than the bus per individual. But the value delivered is just vastly better. And compare that to this other thing that you compared to of let's hire an army, and it makes you and I look cheap.
Yeah, or let's relabel existing people we call them leftover roles into blah Agile people now, and we essentially. But by the way, we need to burn this year's budget, because if we don't, guess what? And
this goes back to an earlier talk that you and I had around just how well vetted the LeSS trainers are. There's not a single one of our peers that are just not, extremely competent at.
I even forgot who we are, but you're right, absolutely right.
Yeah.
But and one more thing I was going to mention, if we got just another minute or two. Speaking of economics and cash flow, looking at the very basic concept of who makes the money, who spends the money. So any organization we typically have, like especially if you take a large investment bank or insurance or pharmaceutical, there were revenue centers, parts of the organization that make money. They actually may need a lot of support and innovation with respect to agility and adaptiveness. Revenue centers, but there are also cost centers, internal structures like operations, research and development that actually spend those dollars to build value. So in my experience, at least, and I can speak only from my experience, traditional way of doing this, typical transformations, rightfully or wrongfully, I think it's actually not ideal. Go like so. Money is given by LOBs, by revenue centers to cost centers, such as an R&D, and agile transformations themselves stem from those structures, which also creates a bit of a anomaly on us versus them. And we are the leaders. We will tell you, we'll dictate to you what agility is, and you just follow along. But excuse us, we actually pay for it. So we get to say what we wish to say. In fact, we don't need to delineate and turn business agility at this point into some sort of a mystified concept, because business agility and organizational agility is a part of organizational agility. Business agility and technology agility should be tied at the hip and not be like on opposite scales. So in my experience, in my view, the more business centers, the more LOBs get involved in agile transformations as leaders, not as followers or laggers, the better. So when a line of business pays and dictates, and not dictates, but pays and defines agility and adaptiveness and has much more to say about what a product should look like, and therefore why should teams be restructured to support product centricity, the more of that is happening, the more we will be getting closer to actually seeing value. Because right now, they're just taking for a ride. Oh, I'm paying for it, and I'm not telling you what it should look like. How crazy is that?
So, Gene, with that, I think we're done. I don't see... Yeah. I think that seems a good place to stop. Again, I am James Carpenter, a certified LeSS trainer in the United States. This is Gene Gendel, who's my peer, who's based in New York. The content that you see here is available on the Agile Carpentry YouTube channel. It is available on the Spotify Agile Carpentry podcast, as well as other podcasts, but they're in audio only. And also, Gene and I typically post this content on each of our LinkedIn profiles
and the sites
sites. And also, you may wish to sign up for our newsletters, because we often include this content as well as a lot of other useful content. Thank you for your time today, and look forward to hearing from you and how we may be of service.
Yep, indeed. Thank you very much for listening to us, James. It was great connecting with you.
Same here. Always good to see you.